I'm going to observe your fourth hour tomorrow. What would you tell me a little bit about the lesson that you're planning?
Right. So we'll actually jump right into a journal or a writing of the day. Usually, I try to make it somewhat related to the topic of the that certain class period. Sometimes it's a little more informal and a little more just to get them writing something they're interested about. Something near a holiday, like right now, like Thanksgiving, I might incorporate a Thanksgiving one. It just kind of whatever it ends up being for that day. That's not super. That's not systemized really as much as some of the other parts. After the journal, we'll jump into discussions from a story that we read last time, The Yellow Wallpaper. Class ran a little long, so we didn't get to some group discussion questions that I wanted to do. So what I'll do is I'll divide them up, just kind of where they're sitting, into groups of 10 or not groups of 10, 10 groups of about 2 or 8 groups or whatever, 3 to 4 group is what I'm going to look for.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll be handing each group a set of discussion questions based on the yellow wallpaper.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it is based sort of in literary stuff like symbolism and more contextual stuff like what do you think the author meant when he said so and so did this.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm looking for them now is we just started the realism unit. So what I'm trying to kind of teach them is how realism may not manifest itself in, is everything happening in a real world sense, but the problems realist authors wrote about were quote unquote real problems that real people had to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after we're done with the discussion of yellow wallpaper, which I'll lean them into sort of gaslight, like women being gaslit sort of prevalently throughout the 19th century, we're going to go into Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin after we're done with our discussion questions. And let me jump back a little bit. During that discussion questions, I'll kind of be looking to be sure that, each member of the group is kind of working together as much as they can be. Obviously, I know there will be some groups leaning on one person harder or not. If I notice that, maybe I'll go over and, pick that kid, individually and maybe kind of ask him what he thinks about the next question up. But what I'm really looking for them is to kind of see each other work as a group and understand, how to respond to that using stuff from the book, because after we read Story of an Hour, that class, which they'll do individually, it's a much shorter story,
Mm-hmm.
they'll be given individual discussion questions that are very similar to that of the yellow wallpaper,
Mm-hmm.
but they'll complete it individually as opposed to a group.
Mm-hmm.
So that way they begin the class kind of with seeing how other kids do it, maybe they're not super comfortable with it, and then by the end they're doing it on their own with a different story.
Neat, neat. I really like how you're adapting from like the needs of the last class and the discussion to the needs of this class. I think that's something that is like very much needed in education and is just a great way to use your class time. So that's awesome. I also really like those two stories. Those are good stories. So what are your goals for student learning for like the overall, like after the lesson, you hope that they walk away with like what sort of like skills gained or what sort of like message?
So I guess message-wise, just the understanding of certain aspects of realism,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of in danger of repeating myself here, but that realism focuses more on not necessarily, oh, these are very realistic events, but these are real problems
Mm-hmm.
that the authors are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is realism sort of much more of a straightforward concept than previous ones like Romanticism or Transcendentalism.
Mm-hmm.
So I think getting into the more of the abstract ideas of realism would benefit them, because we focus so much on the basics of Romanticism and Transcendentalism that getting to the abstract ideas of, what is a real problem? What is someone having, what are these kind of shared experiences people have that make it a real problem? And them understanding that sort of is my goal, as kind of vague as that is.
Mm-hmm. And I also would like, I kind of wonder if they're going to walk away with some discussion skills as well, or at least like
Mm-hmm.
progression of which, like that's,
Hopefully.
yeah, like it's always kind of interesting to see students discuss literature and like how that changes over time. I know this is your class of juniors,
Mm-hmm.
and primarily I've worked with younger grades so far, and I think that that's like, it's an interesting thing of how they kind of adapt to their discussion levels. So my next question is, have you taught this lesson before or similar lessons like it? And this is your first year.
Right, correct.
So have you done this lesson before in other units maybe?
Very similar ones in
Mm-hmm.
Romanticism. They were in a group, and there was a much longer list of questions, and it was a much bigger assignment,
Mm-hmm.
but they were in a group. where they were to pick a story of romanticism. Some of the options we had were Follow the House of Usher,
Mm-hmm.
Young Goodman Brown, and I am blanking on the other one. But they would choose as a group.
Mm-hmm.
They would read together, whether that's they would want to read individually, they read to each other. I let them decide that as a group, and then they would work on analyzing kind of, okay, so what are some examples of imagery, sort of some universal lit terms and stuff, and then here are some aspects of romanticism, identify where these pop up in the story, or if they don't pop up in the story.
Mm-hmm.
So similar, but this is a much more compressed version.
Mm-hmm. So knowing kind of the experiences that you've had with that, with like this class and kind of the age group and just like the difference between romanticism and realism, are there any challenges that you're kind of foreseeing moving forward that you're kind of anticipating as you embark on this lesson? And it's okay if they're not. I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely some kids that I'm going to keep an eye out tomorrow for not participating in the group, and I'm really going to challenge them and mention to them if I notice that hey, you will have to do this on your own later in this class with a different story. So it would really be beneficial if you participated and kind of asked the right questions to your group, because there's going to be a lot of kids that can help out in there. And dividing the group ups will be a big part of that, and I still haven't. That'll be sort of an in the moment thing. If it's going to be, if I'm more comfortable with like, all right, there's a good set of four right there, that could be a good group. That'll be more of an in the moment decision. But a lot of what I like to see is sort of peer scaffolding to help them, because I'm sure I've said this before, but the way I like to think of it is, I can explain it to them over and over again, but if they hear like someone at their own level explain it to them, it's going to bridge a gap that I might not be able to. So then the challenge would then be, even if they didn't participate, even after me talking to them, they didn't participate, they didn't do what they were asked to do, then that's going to be a big challenge for them with the story of an hour, where we will be reading it individually and they will be answering the questions individually.
Right.
Because with Yellow Wallpaper, we listened to an audiobook as we read along, then I would stop it, kind of pose some questions to them relating back to realism. This is going to be much more individual focused. I'm like, okay, how well can you do this on your own?
Right. That, like, we're scaffolding both in like peer-to-peer, but you're also scaffolding in how that they are going to progress with the discussion questions, which brings up an interesting kind of conversation about like the role of introverts and like when we have to like kind of overcome certain aspects of our, I don't know, personality situations for brief moments of time. Like we got to find our voice for a while.
Because that's a skill to teach in and of itself.
Absolutely. And I think that that's something that like we need to be able to, in certain circumstances when the situation calls for it. Right. How will you know if the lesson is successful? Like what are the key ways that you're going to look for as like kind of benchmarks for like, yeah, this felt like we did what we needed to do?
So at the beginning, it'll be definitely just kind of judging group by group the participation level. Are they actually discussing, or is it like, are they just passing the paper around, be like, all right, it's your turn to answer this? And then collecting those papers, seeing how that went group by group, and were they accurate? Is there different handwriting? Is this all in one person's voice who's just telling them what to write? So partly in that, and then going on to the later part of the lesson, sort of, are they completing the assignment? Are they answering those individual discussion questions? How much do they have to reread? How much not how accurate maybe the discussion questions are, but when you're in November, you can kind of tell each individual students, did they give this question their full effort, or were they parroting things they heard other kids say? So by judging sort of when I collect that individual assignment at the later end, that'll be sort of a post-class judgment after I review them. Later, beginning half, it'll be more in the moment, how's each group doing judgment.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm really excited to observe your class. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're planning on teaching for 6th hour tomorrow.
So tomorrow during 6th hour, we're going to solve our unit problem, which is our unit's called Pit and the Pendulum, and the students are trying to investigate and solve how long it takes a 30-foot pendulum to swing 10 times. So through the unit, we modeled solving that unit. All of the mathematics they learned were drove by the math that we needed to solve that unit problem. And so we solved it mathematically in class through curve fitting, the square root function, and then tomorrow we'll actually go outside and swing a 30-foot pendulum, and so the students can see how accurate their equations were that they came up with, and then we'll finish up the second half of the block working on their test review.
That's really neat. What happens if their equations, like, what does it look like if their equations aren't accurate versus they are accurate? Just like...
So we collect the data in class together, so everybody's data goes together, and so that the unit isn't like an epic ever failure.
Yeah.
The data is very much controlled by 5 years of doing this lesson. We know like what the data should be, and so everyone's data gives them an equation within 2 seconds, and as long as there aren't any like huge weather impact outside with like extreme wind, we historically the data we collect yields a successful and in the students' eyes, if they're within a second or 2 seconds of the actual time, they think it's just amazing that the 30-foot pendulum can be predicted using up to 6-foot predictions in the class. So
what a neat like application of math. I want to say real world application, but I know that pendulums aren't really like applicable to everybody's like career choices, but it's still a neat way to apply math in a way that is unexpected and really exciting. So what are your goals? I know this is your end of unit project, like the culminating, you all have done a lot of work to get here. So even throughout the unit, what have been your goals for them to understand, like maybe I know there are a lot of goals throughout the unit, but like your major tenets of goals, like throughout the unit that you've hoped that they understand as they go embarking on this like last project and this like their review before the assessment?
So we not really math related, but there's been a lot of growth mindset that we focused on throughout the whole year, and we like to talk about being positive and how we can be learners at every stage, no matter, just like you said, they're probably not going to have a career that involves them knowing how long a pendulum takes to swing. However, everybody's going to be in a situation where they're going to be posed with a problem with data. This is a little bit of data we have. How do we solve this problem? And hopefully they can reflect back on this and pull this out of their memory, like, hey, maybe we could use mathematics and look at collecting this data, write an equation, and try to extrapolate and make a prediction. And so I give them several examples through class of ways that I've used mathematics to model situations and making a prediction in that aspect. And so that's kind of the overall goal. And especially during this unit, I hear students say, what an interesting way for the math, like why we're doing the math we're doing through this very interesting math context. Like, we started by reading a story. It doesn't usually happen that often in math. And so students seem to appreciate that they have a reason for what we're doing, and I don't hear the question, when am I ever going to use this in life? Like, there's always a reason why.
I know that we look at data constantly in our profession or trying to make decisions. So that's awesome that they're looking at it from that perspective. In addition to it's just really fun to like apply math to weaponry, like that's great. So we've talked previously, and like just having worked with you, I know, Stacy, that you've taught this lesson before, and like similar versions of this lesson. So I'll go ahead and I'll skip over that because that's not relevant to our conversation. But I do wonder, like, and you've kind of answered this previously, like how this lesson will be successful. So in the past, when you have to make adjustments based on the weather, like what kind of things do you kind of like adapt for? Like if there is extreme weather, is there a backup plan, or do you have like a setup in the gym? Like what is the contingency in that situation?
So we start out the unit by saying, like, how can we solve this problem? Because you mentioned, can we do this in the gym? We actually don't have any physical space in the school that's tall enough for a 30-foot pendulum. And so we have video of the 30-foot pendulum if it would happen to have a snowstorm or something for like 2 days or 3 or 4 class periods in a row where we can't go outside,
Mhm.
we could just fall back on like using the data that other like years have collected.
Mhm.
But honestly, if it's above 30 degrees and it's not raining, we've went outside. So
Yeah.
we've been out there in a lot of wind and a lot of cold weather, and we just make that work. We have, however, like had to like complete the unit review, take the test,
Mhm.
and then do the pendulum swing like after the test.
Mhm.
The actual 30-foot pendulum is not it's not a integral part of being able to
Mhm.
finish the unit, because we solve the unit problem in class just by math modeling,
Mhm.
but we go outside and say like, and at the beginning of the unit we talk about we can't swing a 30-foot pendulum in class, and so we have to use math modeling. And so I don't even tell them until the very end of the unit that we're ever even going to go outside.
Mhm.
And so that way they don't have that sitting in the back of their head like, why are we doing this math? We could just swing the 30-foot pendulum.
Right.
So it's just the actual swinging of the 30-foot pendulum is just saying like, how cool is this that we got this accurate of numbers and we were able to use mathematics and get it. And so like I said, if we can't go outside, then we can just look at the video and I'll have proof for them like how this is applicable and successful.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm excited to watch your 6th hour tomorrow and be able to go outside with you. It'll be a crisp walk.
Yeah.
So, I appreciate your time. Okay. All right. How do you feel that your lesson went?
I think it went good. I think there are places for improvements, but overall, I think that they I think they left with the skills they needed to leave with. That they recognized realism. No, there's not ASAP today, is there?
Okay. So yeah, you were talking about how like you felt like it went pretty well overall, but you did see some room for improvement. So what were some of the things that you thought like went really well? Where like this was a part that I feel like if we could do this every day, this would be great.
So they did a good job about really trying to dig into what the symbolism of the wallpaper itself meant.
Mhm.
Maybe the symbolism of the baby as well. They were playing with the ideas of, well, maybe maybe she goes on to kill the baby. You know, they were theorizing what would happen after the story, which was not prompted. So it was cool to see them go into that more hypothetical thinking. So I think, and prior, what I didn't go over in the first interview is I had found a short video version of the yellow wallpaper, and I think that visualization also helped them out a lot, because at that age, it's very visual. They can read a story and understand it, but when they see it play out, I think it works in a different part of the mind that maybe helps them conceptualize it a little better. And when they conceptualize it a little better, they can start working, I think, with symbols a little better. They can start hypothetically thinking a little better with it as well.
Yeah.
So I think them working with the symbols and abstract thoughts with the story went really well.
Yeah, I love the use of like using multiple mediums to get the story across. I think that's a great way to, especially for your like readers at different tiers. Like it's going to help everybody, but especially for readers who are struggling with any vocabulary or like any English language learners who are now adapting for them. So any areas that you thought like for the future that you would like to kind of work on those, or for any similar lessons that you do in the future?
So I think looking back on it, maybe when we moved on to reading Story of an Hour, it might have been beneficial to still read it as a class. Maybe not using the audiobook like I used last time, maybe breaking it down to group reading, small group reading instead. Because I still, just judging quickly on the individual discussion papers that were turned in by the end of class, some kids didn't get the full concept of it. Some kids, the comprehension wasn't completely there. So maybe before I hand out those discussion questions again, I'm sure I need to do a better job of ensuring that there is better comprehension before I ask them to start really analyzing it.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder with like the shorter pieces like that, if students like, it's almost as if it's like they see one person get done, and because it's all happening in class, and they're like, oh, it's okay for me to be done now as well, and it's that permission for readers who are maybe not like as willing to read. It's so interesting that happens. But I like that you're talking about scaffolding in a way that kind of gives them a little more structure in those opportunities. So could I offer just one suggestion?
Absolutely.
Okay, I know you did a lot of work on this story in college, so you probably already know about this text, but I know that Charlotte Perkins Gilman wrote a short, like an essay, like a really short essay about why she wrote the yellow wallpaper. Have you read that before?
I've seen bits and pieces of it just from that John Green.
Yeah.
That clip, he talked a little bit about it, so that was nice. So
I looked it up just because I was like, there's always the joke of like they didn't write another book called Why I Wrote This Book, but she wrote an essay called Why I Wrote this short story, and it's really short, and so I don't know if in the future, if you've got like time is always of the essence, but like that might be something to look into. Is it was reasonably short and it was very well written, and it even references Kansas at one point. And it's just kind of like a neat, just like I think you'd have kids in the room who liked that. So.
That would connect. I'd be like, oh,
yeah, that's us. It's not a positive mention. It's like a physician. It's like there's a physician in Kansas who says something really derogatory about women, but like you know,
yes, it's still good or bad. It's PR.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, thank you for letting me engage with you in this way. All right. So, thank you for letting me observe your classroom. How do you feel that today's lesson went?
I was very impressed with the students' motivation and genuine enthusiasm with going outside and watching the 30-foot pendulum. It is a little bit lackluster compared to what we were doing in class because our trials in class lasted anywhere from 8 seconds to 26 seconds with the length of the pendulums, but when we got outside for the 30-foot pendulum, they were staring for a minute at a time watching the weight swing back and forth. And so the students really did seem genuinely interested, though, when we came back.
Mike Wilson, you have a call on line 3, please. No. Mike Wilson, line 3.
This is life.
So when we came back into class and we were looking at their averages, the students were really excited to see how close that they were to their prediction times. And so there's really amazing, like mathematics, they were all within 1 second of the prediction of the full pendulum swings. That was fun.
Yeah. And you and I had talked previously about like, because this is a unit that you've had such success with over time, like there's kind of like you are able to know based off their predictions how close or far they're going to be kind of ahead of time. Is that am I on the mark when I say that, or am I a little off?
Yeah. So you asked about if students like when we were talking about weather, if we couldn't go outside, kind of we know that these predictions are gonna. So we're setting them up for success when we're collecting data and those predictions. But even if we didn't guide them as much as we did, they would still be relatively close predictions that they were making.
Absolutely, right. And it's important that they've got like a moment of like in their application moment that it doesn't like that the entire class doesn't fall completely flat, because that would be so disheartening, especially with it's very chilly out. It was brisk. Okay, so we had chatted about like what kinds of improvements you would instill like the next time you do this lesson, and as we were chatting about that, we had kind of brushed upon like you've already put in some improvements from last year's. Would you mind speaking about like what kind of improvements did you put in this year's? So this was the end of a unit like application of all the lessons they had learned. It also was followed by a test review. What kind of improvements did you put in this year that were different from last year? Like what kind of advancements did you use?
So with this lesson in particular, the test review, we gave the in previous years, 10 years of teaching, it almost seemed that in traditional math classroom, the block before your test, you were given a packet, your test review, and you were said, all right, this block, we're working on this test review, and you need to finish it by the test so you're ready to go. So over the past maybe few units, or even we started this last year, has been giving them the test review like a block or maybe even 2 blocks in advance, depending on how much time they got to work on it in class, and then posting the answer key in the classroom and giving them completion points versus accuracy points, because they're going to get accuracy points when they take the test. And so I've had my test scores go up. But obviously, as you teach more, you feel like you're a better teacher. But I think that this slight change has improved my test scores. So they get their test review in advance. So then they check their answers in the classroom. So they know when they go up to look at the test review, they circle the ones that are wrong, they go back to their seat and fix them. But I find that they are positive, then when they come into the test that day, they can't sit there and say, I'm going to fail, because they have a test review that's done with all the correct answers. And so whether they had to learn from it looking through the test review, or if they did it themselves and then checked, but they got that gratification and that success, and they know. We talk a lot about growth mindset and positivity, and I don't have this yet, well, let's figure it out. And so everyone comes into the test then with a complete test review that's done, and they have the correct answers. So that was like a main thing that we've changed for this lesson. And then we also had some changes for overall in the units this year. So instead of just having notes happen as they do, like maybe today, let's write this down on notebook paper, or it's a tough topic like standard deviation, and I give them a guided note packet or a piece of paper just for that day. We've been working towards having a note packet to give to the students on the first day of the unit. And so we've really kind of scripted out. We know exactly these are all the notes that we're going to cover in the unit. And so we're really mindful of what we're going to do each day. And we have this pretty strategic common lesson plan across all the freshman math teachers. And I've really enjoyed having that note packet. And then that has pushed me as a teacher more to have a video for every single section of notes, whether I do it live in class or we do a flipped model. The students then always have that video that they can go back and watch if they want to watch it again. Freshmen maybe are not doing that, but every student then is absent. I'm not just saying, hey, copy those notes. They're actually getting to hear me say it. And I think that is very powerful compared to just copying down what someone else has on a piece of paper.
Right. So just a question, and like the answer I'm just very curious about. On your final exam, is there any reference to like the act or any of their data that they gathered from the pendulum swing, or is that like kind of over and done with following the like act itself before the test review?
No. So the time that it takes for the pendulum to swing back and forth, we do not test about. We do ask them, so along with the pendulum swing, we talk about like being a good experimenter. So in science and math, what sort of things do we need to do? And so we talk about like the characteristics of a good experiment, do several trials to make sure you're not getting fluke results, get an average with those trials. I'm blanking on the third one right now. So we talk about those type of characteristics that go along with. And then we talked about the variables. So when we started the unit, it was like what affects the pendulum. Does like the weight at the bottom, we call it the bob, or the length of the rope, or how far back we pull that. So those three characteristics we focused on. And I asked them on the test, like, what was the only variable that mattered?
I remember that question.
And so we talked about that when we were outside, obviously. And so the length of the rod is what matters. And so those type of like enrichment questions that go along with it. But I don't ever ask them, like, what was the equation that the 30-foot pendulum was going to use? So,
right. Okay. Well, thank you for all your help, and I appreciate you letting me observe your classroom.
Yep, thanks.